I cannot believe that this is my second video talking about like predatory behavior and grooming aimed at young girls. And you know what? Let me fix that. It's not that I can't believe it, because I can believe it, because stuff is really messed up. I just hate the fact that it is like that. So I've got a few prefaces to go through before we really get into the video. If you couldn't super tell from those things and from what I've just said, today we're going to be talking about predatory behavior and grooming targeted at young girls in the alt-rock or alt-music communities. Just like the video I did talking about exposing predators on Twitter, I'd like to say that this video is going to contain a lot of sensitive topics. And if you can't watch, that's totally okay. I'm going to include some resources below for if you are dealing with any sort of abusive relationship or sexual assault or anything of that nature, or if you know someone who is. Also, today's topic, while I might be focusing on the alternative rock, punk, emo music scene, it can definitely be translated to so many other genres. And it can also be translated to different areas like film or sports or anything else. In this video, I'm going to be focusing on a lot of young female victims, but I would like to acknowledge that predatory behavior and grooming can also be targeted at young boys and young genderqueer people. And lastly, this video is going to be a little bit different than my other ones, where I've talked about more serious stuff. In these videos, I always try to go out and find research articles that have empirical evidence of these different things. However, I had a pretty hard time finding empirical evidence surrounding the specific topics I wanted to. I had a really hard time finding the age demographics of people that are fans of this scene of music, or trying to find research papers about the power dynamics in alternative music. So it's definitely going to be leaning more towards anecdotal or observational rather than empirical. I just want to put that out there because it is a little bit different, and I wish I had the facts and numbers to back some of these things up, and I hope in the future that there's going to be more resources on that. You know what? I haven't decided if I'm going to do a dissertation or a thesis my senior year, so maybe this is something that I can go ahead and research in the future. It's definitely something I'd be interested in and I think is very important. And as I have in videos before, I did find research articles that were adjacent to this topic or kind of an expansion or tangential to this topic, and while I might not be specifically referencing them, I'm gonna include all of the ones I've been able to look through in the comments or in the description box below. I have not been able to fully read through all of these, but I've skimmed through them, and I think that they're pretty good informational resources. So I think that I should start off with the reason that I'm making this video, and that's because in the past week or so there have been multiple allegations brought against members in some different alternative rock bands. Namely, the ones that I know are the Frights, Buttertones, and Swimmers. The common thing between all of these allegations was that one of the members in the band was abusing their position of power in order to begin a sexual relationship with a minor. Cherry Glazer was 14 years old when Sean Redman of the Buttertones began a sexual relationship with her, and he was 20. Lydia Knight of the Regrets was 16 years old when Joey Armstrong of Swimmers began a relationship with her, and he was 22. I don't want to retell the details of their stories. You can find them on social media. It's just because I don't want to butcher what happened to them. I think it's better that you see directly what they've said so you can, see how they feel. The wording is very important, obviously, and that's not something that I'd like to misconstrue or butcher. And I wouldn't like to take the stories and experiences out of their own hands. So from this, the first thing I'd like to talk about is hypocrisy in the music scene. I feel like a lot of alternative music scenes pride themselves on being quite progressive. I think this is especially true of punk rock and the do-it-yourself music scene. I actually did not know what the do-it-yourself music scene is. That's something that I've learned today. I don't know the specifics of what that scene is, but it's come up a lot in what I've been looking up. When in reality, these music scenes are actually very androcentric or male-centric and continue to profit off of pre-existing misogynistic systems and abusive patriarchal roots. And a tangential conversation that is something I might explore in the future, I was doing the research and I stumbled across this book that had a chapter about how punk rock was being dominated by the straight white man, and I think that's very interesting and also probably very true because so many of the bands I listen to in this music scene are fronted and dominated by straight white men, and that's another interesting conversation to have, and how that perpetuates and plays into the culture that's already existing. But that's something I'll explore later, but I just thought that was something that might be of interest to have in your head. Going back to talking about the hypocrisy of the progressive versus actually not progressive thing, I think Swimmers is actually a very good example of this. this. Although I was never a fan of theirs, by talking to some people who were, it seems that they really pride themselves on being like super feminist and super progressive and making their community a safe space for all people. And just the other day before Lydia Knight's allegation surfaced, I think that she was inspired by this post to like talk about her story. But Swimmers posted something talking about how they like stood against sexual assault and the abuse of power in the music industry. Meanwhile, while they said this, one of their own members had abused their power in order to enter sexual relations with a minor, and the people in the band knew, and other bands around them knew, but there wasn't really anything that was done about it. It's just so hypocritical. Like, you cannot stand against something that you actively participate in. And if you were to look up at their post and see the wording, it's just so gross to think that they're saying these things that sound great and sound really progressive, and then take a look at what Joey did and how it's completely, as they say in their own post, antithetical to their values. Something else that's indicative of this hypocrisy is the content of songs in the music scene. While I would say like alt rock musicians and like adjacent genre musicians have strayed away from like doing explicitly misogynistic content, there's still like traces of it in lyrical content and imagery in like music videos and merch and other things. Two songs immediately come to mind when I think of this. When I hear these two songs, I just get a very weird feeling. One of them is Crazy by Makeout and the other is 7 Days by the Somerset. So in both of these songs, it's the like singer talking about their crazy girlfriend, and it's talking about their girlfriend doing like extremely emotionally manipulative things, but the singer is like, but I still love, like, she hates me, but she loves me, but I love her, and we have sex all the time, and her pussy's great. And more seriously though, I understand that it's extremely difficult to get out of an abusive relationship, whether that be like emotionally or physically abusive. Whether that's because of your own personal safety not being able to get out, or because you still have emotions for that person, or for some other reason. Once again, I have the resources linked below. Hopefully that has more information that I'll be able to provide, and hopefully can have some resources that are of aid to you or someone you know if they're in that situation. With that said, these songs don't really condemn this emotionally manipulative behavior. In fact, I would go as far to say that it kind of romanticizes it. My thought is that by normalizing and romanticizing this kind of emotionally manipulative behavior, the musicians are further enabling this pre-existing manipulation of power and structures that exist within this community. And in some other songs of this nature where they're talking about like having an emotionally manipulative significant other, sometimes they'll also like for a second be like, I've also done some shit too, but let me dismiss that really quick. And I think that can be a sort of play to push it on to the woman and keep the blame off of them in case something were to come up. That's something that's just like an inkling of a thought that I'd have to see. I'd have to compare the lyrics of all the different songs that have this kind of thing, because I think there are quite a few of them, not just in this genre, but in a lot. So this idea now leads me to the normalization of age gaps, especially between younger girls and older men. We have seen like a lot of musicians, lots of different genres, admit to the fact that the music industry has like extremely abusive patriarchal roots and definitely like exploits youth and sexuality. And if you didn't notice, I like pretty much stole those words exactly from Swimmers because I'm trying to make a point. Trying to bring it back to the hypocrisy and then being like super infuriating. And you know what? I would like to share some physical examples of the exploitation of youth and sexuality. This is a little segment I like to call popular pedophilic songs. Let's start with number 1. We've got 17 by Winger. Part of this game is reading some of the lyrics of these songs to you guys. So let's go ahead and read this, right? So it's just stuff about like sparks flying the first time you see her, gross at first already, and then we get to like the chorus, or at least I assume this is chorus. I did not listen to the song, I just read the lyrics. Why would I listen to it? So it says, and just when I thought she was coming to my door, she whispered sweet and brought me to the floor. She said, I'm only 17, but I'll show you love like you've never seen. She's only 17. Daddy says she's too young, but she's old enough for me. And then it talks about like, I think some euphemisms for her vagina and saying that he's in love and that she's 17. And that's pretty much the entire song. This song came out in 1988 and I looked up the members. The youngest member was 21 and the oldest member was like 35. It's like a college junior or senior going after like a high school junior, and that's considering I don't even know if the youngest member was the singer or at what capacity the youngest singer like member was involved. I mean, all of them were involved because they all let this thing happened. So the singer might have been 21, a college junior going after a high school junior, which is still really gross. Or it could have been a 35-year-old going after a 17-year-old, which is literally more than double the age. Literally more than double the age. So now that we got that one, let's go to another one. From a little band I don't know if you've heard of, named Kiss. You know, the ones that look like, you know, Juggalos? Except they're worse than Juggalos. We love Insane Clown Posse. Thank you, Insane Clown Posse, for your contribution to this world. Fuck Kiss. Because they have a song called Christine 16. I think you know where this is going, but I'll read you the lyrics anyways. I want you guys to be equally as disgusted as me. So this song starts off with this whole same thing too of like, oh my god, I saw you the first time I saw you. I was like, whoa. And so it says, the like, Christine 16, I don't usually say things to girls your age, but when I saw you coming out the school that day I knew, Christine 16, I've gotta have you. And then, oh my god, this part makes me even more grossed out somehow. It says, she's been around, but she's young and clean. I've gotta have her, can't live without her. And later in the song, it also repeats like, she's so clean. That just makes me think of like the whole like idea of, you know, youth and virginity, and especially the idea of virginity, the whole like societal concept of virginity is extremely kind of pedophilic. And the obsession with young girls being clean and wanting to dirty them and soil them like a sexual conquest against a young girl. It's just, ugh. It's disgusting. And this song by Kiss came out in 1977. So next, we've got a couple bangers from this guy named Ted Nugent. I don't know how to say his name, but this one's a little bit different because earlier I was talking about like how newer musicians like pride themselves on being like progressive. This dude definitely did not. This dude was like openly conservative, I'm pretty sure. But I wanted to include this anyways because he was in the rock scene and I think really like substantial. I had never heard of him before, but I'm sure that he was foundational to some, you know, musician who's currently doing music. And so because he was a part of this culture and the rock scene, and because of the message of these songs, I thought it would still be like prudent to include them. This one's just kind of like a little bonus before we get into the really, really bad one. But he has a song called I Am a Predator. And I think almost all of the lyrics in that song are I am a predator. Why would you, I don't know why you'd want to, you know, say that out loud and just like, and people probably sang along to that. I hate it. I really do. I really hate it. But the real kicker is he has a song called Jailbait. And at first he's like, I can't resist like stealing from an old lady's purse, blah, blah, blah. But then he's like, I can't resist fucking a 13-year-old. So he says in the song, like plain as day, well, I don't care if you're just 13. You look too good to be true. I just know that you're probably clean. There's one little thing I got to do. The whole thing again of being obsessed with the cleanliness or the purity of a girl and trying to take that away from her. And then also he talks about fucking this 13-year-old, but then he also talks about fucking this 13-year-old's mom. And she's saying like, oh, your mom likes younger men. I'm younger than her. And then also he says, oh, this is so gross. This is so gross. He says, honey, you look so nice. She's young. She's tender. Won't you please surrender? And then it's all right, baby. It's quite all right. I asked your mama. And then the end of the song. The end of the song. Wait a minute, officer. Don't put those handcuffs on me. What about her? Hey, I'll share her with you. I don't know, if you're just not like completely disgusted by that, with the idea of trying to get a child to surrender sexually to you and to make her like unclean, and then offering to share her with an authoritative figure, that's so gross. Like, I literally don't know. And I know you might someone might argue like these songs are like from the 70s and 80s. Yes, they are. And maybe we don't have a lot of songs that are as explicitly pedophilic as this, but these bands, especially one with like a big name like Kiss, were definitely foundational to so many young musicians. And those young musicians grew up and became foundational to now musicians. So they continue to have an influence on artists to this day, even if it's indirectly. And songs like that directly contributed to a culture of encouraging and normalizing these large age gaps and this abuse of the power. Something else I'd like to say, slightly tangential but important, if you consider the time frame, like these came out in the late 70s and partially in the 80s. So this is like the aftermath of like the 60s and 70s sexual revolution. And I know they're all about like sexual liberation and stuff, but it's super sad to think that the sexual revolution probably definitely normalized in the mainstream and encouraged like these pedophilic relationships and the large age gaps. And in the US, they might not have been so explicit about it, but in other countries like in Germany and in Great Britain, I believe, but definitely in Germany, they were literally explicit about trying to like legalize and encourage sexual relationships between children and adults. So during my research, I learned about a few very infamous teenage groupies from like 70s rock, namely Sable Starr and Lori Maddox. If you've never heard of them, I would consider looking them up, especially Lori Maddox. Lori Maddox has some like insane stories, and it's very uncomfortable but very eye-opening to like what this time was. And I learned that a lot of extremely famous rock and rollers, if you were to look up these stories, you would see who engaged in sexual activity with these younger girls and like others, young groupies. And I also learned that no one's gonna do shit about it. No one has done shit about it, and no one will do shit about it, and none of these people are gonna get punished or reprimanded or condemned for what they've done, because people argue that like that was just the culture of the time. One of the people who's argued that is probably the most famous groupie ever, Pamela DeBar. She wrote a book called I'm With the Band, though I haven't read it. I've seen some like descriptions of it, and it's crazy. It's crazy stuff. But she would describe it as like there being an equal energy and love between the musicians and the groupies, and that is just how it was. And she talked about how when she was with some really famous musicians, and those musicians would then leave her for like a 13-year-old girl or a 14-year-old girl, and she said she was disgusted by it, but then she was like, it's just how it was. Obviously, you can acknowledge that was the culture of the time while also condemning that culture and the people who contributed to that culture. It's really important to condemn that behavior and the people who participated in it, even when it was like normal, because that culture is what has formed the music scene today. And this is super evident in the continuous sexual exploitation of young fans. While there may not be as many like traditional groupies, I'm sure there still are. I haven't personally witnessed it, but I'm sure they still exist. I would say we have a new age of digital groupies. There are all these like 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, sometimes even younger, who are on Twitter, on Instagram, on other social media platforms, just praising these bands and musicians. And we see in a lot of these stories when girls are coming forward that social media was the gateway for these band members to talk to them and to begin to abuse their power and enter that inappropriate relationship. And this isn't me trying to condemn like a 13 or 14-year-old being on social media, because I think that's fine. It's just obviously you shouldn't have someone manipulating a 13 or 14-year-old who's just trying to like express their love for a band and probably does not know what's going on is wrong. And it's just so disgusting, because like I was someone on Twitter when I was like 14. I loved these bands and I loved these musicians, and then I went on to like YouTubers and actors and other things, and I love them, and I'm just so glad, especially when I was 14 and into like the scene of music, I'm very glad I didn't get more into it, because the chances that something like this could have happened to me are extremely high. And I'm sure stuff like this has happened to so many people, and they just can't come forward about it because of safety, or they don't realize, or they just feel ashamed. And there's so much on this topic that I could talk about. There are things like the blatant sexualization of young girls at concert and music festivals, like Warped Tour. Warped Tour, woo! What an interesting time. And also the disgusting behavior that is exhibited towards female-fronted bands and bands that are comprised of women and just like young girl and female fans. Thinking about, there's some articles that I'm going to be including that talk about Warped Tour, like both in the 90s and like in the like 2010s. And just the amount of times that they would encourage the sexualization of like the younger girls, and the amount of like male-fronted bands that would be like, the girls are looking like really good today. And you feel like it's a compliment, but then you're like, something feels wrong about it, but then you're like, no, I should accept it because like this band that I love is complimenting me, but no, you shouldn't because it's really gross. From everything in this video, I would just like to leave you with this. We need to actively work to dismantle the systems and the ideologies that enable this predatory behavior and this manipulation of power. And this goes for like the music scene and things outside of the music scene. In the music scene, if you're a musician and you see someone in your own group or in another group abusing these powers or getting close to abusing these powers or entering inappropriate relationships with their fans, don't ignore it. The same for your fan. If you see like a group that you admire and listen to engaging in really weird relationships with other fans or with like yourself, don't ignore it. I understand that you can't always directly call it out or directly message them or directly post something about it because it could be unsafe, but even if you can't do something like that, you shouldn't ignore it. We need to pay attention to like the songs we sing and the images that we consume from these bands, because even though if it's not like explicitly misogynistic and predatory, there could be underlying themes of that, and then we're just letting that build into our subconscious and like accepting it. And we need to pay attention to the words they use and the way they call out these issues and see if they're victimizing themselves or if they're openly admitting that they might have contributed to this culture and that they're trying to actively work against it now, or to see if they've been actively working against it. It's just unfair that young people who simply want to enjoy music and have a safe space get that trust and that safeness taken away from them by the people who promised it. And as someone who enjoys this genre of music, it sometimes makes me feel like ashamed. The fact that I have to look up a band, like a new band that I find, and look up like, have they sexually assaulted anyone or engaged in relationships with a minor? You know something is wrong. That shouldn't be happening in this scene or in any other scene. We need to ensure that music is really a safe space for everyone, fans and artists included. That's pretty much it for today's video. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to provide more like empirical evidence of different things. Maybe this is something I can return to in the future if I find more research. Maybe in the future I'll go ahead and write some scholarly articles about it. I do not like writing scholarly articles, but this is a very interesting topic and it's something that I think is important. So maybe I am suddenly interested in writing scholarly articles. If you'd like to comment below, like if you've had some personal experiences such as this within the alternative music scene or another instance in another scene, if that's something you're comfortable sharing and would like to share, the comments are free for you to do that. And it's free to also just see what you've observed. And if you share the same observations that I do, if you've observed other things, if there's some things that I said that you were like, I don't really see that, but I see this, I don't really see that, I do see that, I haven't seen that, stuff like that. I'd love to be able to expand this discussion. Hopefully there will be a change. I know that the music industry has some very, very deeply entrenched problems that will not change overnight, that will not change in a year, that might not change in 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years. You know, they might not change while I'm alive. But I hope having conversations like this will help catalyze the process of change. And that's all I can hope for, you know? That's all we can hope for. So thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you'd like to see more content. I'm gonna be making gaming videos. I'm gonna make videos sort of like this. I'm gonna make videos sort of like other things that we'll figure out later. But yeah. Thanks for watching again. I keep saying that, but thanks for watching. If you're already here, it's crazy. Whoa, this is far into the video. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.